One of the topics that's still really taboo in the workplace are workplace transitions, or more specifically, when we leave a job. If you've ever been in a situation where it's been a bit hush hush, or you're not allowed to share that you're leaving or you're moving on, and you don't really openly talk about these career transitions that we're going through, then today's episode is absolutely for you, especially if you want to create an environment where we're more open about these things. This is the Happier at Work podcast, the career and culture podcast for people first leaders. I'm your host, Aoife O'Brien. I'm the career and culture strategist for commercial leaders and teams. And my guest today is Robert Glazer. I had the absolute honor of having Robert. Robert shares some fantastic insights, not only from his amazing career, but also from his new book, Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice. I know you're going to enjoy today's episode, and there's so many takeaways. There's one little gem that I definitely took, but I'll leave that up to you to decide which one that was. Do enjoy today's episode. Don't forget to get involved in the conversation. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so I would love to see you over there. And share this with someone who you think needs to listen to this today. Enjoy today's episode. Robert, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I've been really excited to have this conversation with you because I've been following you for quite some time now. Do you want to let listeners know a little bit about you, your background, and what got you into doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My background was I founded a few different businesses. I guess I'm part of that disease you call a serial entrepreneur. The largest of which is a company called Acceleration Partners, which I remain executive chair of. I'm not involved in the day to day. And in the midst of building that company and thinking about what kind of company we wanted to build, we did a lot of things differently. And I started writing about doing things differently in our industry and in our culture. And we won a bunch of different best places to work awards. And so as that business continued to grow, I kind of spent more time writing and thinking about challenging some of the conventional wisdom in businesses and seeing how we could create better leaders and create better organizations. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time today.
Brilliant. I love that. And I know your most recent book is you're author of several books, and it sounds like you love writing and you're
Writing's easy. Launching the books is a lot harder. So I'm on the next one now that's coming out in October, and it's a lot of time.
Yeah, this is it. I think this is what I've heard. I'm in the process of writing a book myself, and what I understand is the writing is actually the easy part. Like you feel like you've finished something and you're like, oh, it's done now. And actually the really hard part is just about to begin. Is like getting it out in the world.
Yes, you will write me in a year and be like, yeah, the writing was the easy part. So.
Yeah, you were so right. So talk to me first about your most recent book, and then maybe we can touch on the one that you're writing as well at the moment.
Yeah. So my latest book was Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice. It was based on my TED Talk, How to Eliminate 2 Weeks Notice. And it sort of came out of a program at our company that at the time was called Mindful Transition and eventually was called the Career Engagement Program. But sort of as we were building that company and culture and trying to really be different, the one area where I realized we were the same was how people left our organization. And and if people are listening globally, I know there's different policies all around the world. The problem's the same, irrespective of the policies. In the U.S., it's employment at will. So people give 2 weeks notice. They don't even have to give that, but that's sort of considered kind of standard. Similarly, companies kind of fire people and give them 2 weeks severance. And when people leave our organization, we had that same sort of 2 weeks notice out of nowhere. And it just seemed to go against a lot of our culture. And I looked at it and said, look, companies have changed. It's not lifetime employment. They're not going to be here forever. We're still treating this like marriage rather than like a sports contract. And like, we should change this. And so we had an opportunity to test it out. It went great. I shouldn't say went great. It went better than expected. We learned some stuff from it. And we continued to sort of launch that program.
Brilliant. I love it. I mean, the whole concept, you're so right. I think the perception maybe from outside of the US is 2 weeks notice. It seems quite harsh, and it seems like the employment laws are rather different. And I know it varies state by state as well. If I think back to my own career history, and oftentimes I had to give 3 months notice, which is fairly standard the more senior you get in an organization. And if I can share a couple of personal things, maybe before we explore this in more detail. So there were two scenarios where I left organizations and kind of in not so great terms. So I left one organization and I wouldn't have left only for personal reasons. I really wanted to travel and explore the world. Otherwise, I would probably still be working there because I loved it so much. I love the people, I love the culture, I love the opportunities that I had to grow. But then I went on to work in two other organizations, and both of them I left because just for various different reasons. And I suppose for me, you know, it may have come out of nowhere for my boss to learn that I wanted to leave. And I'd love to explore
I,
some of the
I was
reasons.
just going
Like,
to say that to you
why
that
do
like
people, yeah,
even if you had 3 months, or had to stay 3 months, the it still was a surprise, when you did it. And it comes from that paradigm of like, we don't talk about this. You don't talk about it.
yes,
And look,
yeah.
Europeans are even more passive aggressive, about this stuff. I remember being at a conference and all these competitors were saying hugging and hello and kissing each other. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. And the person's like, we don't like each other at all. We just like that, so,
Oh,
so there's a
they're
lot of
being
like,
polite.
yeah, they're being polite. We don't talk about it. This is not, but look, this is just, we don't talk about it. With this assumption that people are going to work there forever. I
Mm,
like, hey, like versus think about sports. You're coming up at the end of the contract. I could give you some signals. We're going to go in a different direction. We're going to sign a younger player. Like, you're due for a big new contract. Or look, a lot of people haven't lived up to their current contract, right? And maybe
yeah.
there's some path to renegotiation, but it's just this. I don't know, a lot of ego, a lot of psychology. If you look at the data, people aren't gonna work there forever. So why don't we just more like sports think about transitions as kind of part of the business and
Mm.
and learn how to manage them in a better way that creates better outcomes.
Yeah, just get it out in the open. It's kind of
Yeah.
the elephant in the room, isn't it? Like, I think these days the average tenure is maybe 2 or 3 years, or it seems to be typical. Like people think, oh, I should stay for 2 or 3 years in this role because otherwise, on my CV, on my resume, it's not going to look so good. And I heard you talking on another podcast episode about like if you work somewhere for 6 months, do you even include it into your resume, or do you just leave it off completely because you didn't
I think
pass
having
it?
that option is great. I think
Mm,
a 6 month again, it seems almost not nice, but if I knew someone, I think most people, this is kind of a separate but tangential. I think most people, this is not empirical, but I've asked most people know with 90% certainty after 2 weeks whether someone's going to work out. I think that is sort of a Malcolm Gladwell blink. Like they have 30 years of this to know that like this is just way too hard from the beginning, and now people
yeah.
don't trust these people. It's not going to work out. And it seems crazy after 3 or 4 weeks to say, why don't we just like pretend this never happened?
Mm,
So you invest, you try. It's really hard to dig out of a trust deficit because now people are more focused on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But again, the honest discussion there could have, it's much easier to pretend that job didn't exist then no matter what you say, when you see a 4 or 6 month stint, someone's gonna be like, and you can only blame the company so many times, right? And that before
mm.
people are like, huh, like
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on here?
You've had a series of these
Yeah.
4 month jobs. What's actually happening?
Right. And
Can,
this is even think about this. You hire someone on a resume to work at your company because you're desperate. Their last 7 jobs have been 18 months. Like what makes you think they're staying at your company for a lifetime? Like
yes.
it's just a
Yeah.
super I don't know. It's just cognitive dissonance, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we take a step back and explore what do you think? How can we get this stuff right? So, how can we make sure that we're hiring the right people who are going to stay a little bit longer in our
Yeah.
organizations, assuming that we're giving them the right conditions to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, way too much. I've worked a lot with Jeff Smart, who's one of the best interview consultants in the world. Way too much of interviewing is hypothetical. And Jeff says, ask hypothetical questions, get hypothetical answers. I was just on a
Mm,
call with a company that were helping to redo their core values, and we were talking about interviews. You can't say, like, what do you think of our core value of own it? They're going to be like, it's great. I love it. I'm own
yeah.
it. What you
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
say is, tell me about a time when you were given responsibility for something and you blew it and what happened, or tell me about a time. So to us, a great interview is behavioral based questions focused
Mm,
on the values, and then some sort of assessment or test or real world work that represents the job people are going to have to do, we used to hire a lot of account managers and they had to send a lot of reports and be careful and be thoughtful. And so we would give a report for them with a bunch of errors in it, both in the Excel
Mm.
spreadsheet and things you should never say to a client in an email. And the people who got it like totally wrong would try to make all kinds of excuses. Well, I was rushed for time and I was this and I was that. And I was like, look, like this is the work.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you
yeah.
don't like it or if it's not intuitive to you, or you don't know that like we'll do better next month, like or some stupid we said some inflammatory thing again, you wouldn't say like the sales were way off, but no worries, I'm sure it'll get better, right? Like if you don't know that, you don't say that to a client, like it might not be the right job for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
Now,
hold off
this
on
is a
that.
more experienced person. If you're
Yeah.
training a younger person from the start, that might be a little bit different. But we always focus kind of half on aptitude and half on values.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. I mean, I've heard you talk about that before, the importance of values and how do you bring more of that into the hiring process and then I suppose into the onboarding and setting people up for success.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've got to build a process. You got to screen for the core values. You got to make sure people understand it. You got to make sure they can do the work, and then you need to kind of hold them accountable. And you also have to understand that you make mistakes, right? It could be the right person in the wrong job. Situations could have changed. This is where something changes and there's some showing of dissatisfaction and performance, and we just don't dig into the root cause. And I talk
Yeah.
about this a lot in the book. There are root
Mm,
causes that are fixable or not fixable. So, you're coming to work a little late and you seem a little, not paying attention to detail. So rather than just saying, wow, your performance is not good and marking you, I have a discussion. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Right. And you could say a couple things. You could say, you know what, I lost my childcare. And so the hours have been really tough and I've just been distracted. And okay, so that's something that you have to fix, right? I can support you, I can help in the hours, but that's something you have to change that should bring your performance back. Second, you might say, you know what, I left sales last year for marketing and I don't love marketing. I miss sales, I miss the quota, I like that better. And so we realize that you're in the wrong job and so you're just not doing what you want to do, and that's performance. The third, and but we, or you didn't get a raise and you really were doing it and you're upset about it, so I can decide whether we want to fix that or not fix that, right? The third thing, you might be like, look, like you guys are work from home, and I really miss the office and it's just not working for me. And, so are we going to get offices? And you're like, no, we're not going to do that. So what's interesting is like, if you go to a doctor and you have a headache, they can give you a Tylenol. And that's what a performance improvement plan is. It's a Tylenol. But a functional doctor would be like, let's figure out whether whether you're glucose intolerant, whether you're dehydrated. You might have a headache because you have a brain tumor, right? So the,
mm,
the the source of these things is different things. In these sort of where the employee problem starts, we don't jump in and look to that root and say, can we fix this? Do they want to fix it? Who has to fix it? We
mm,
wait until things get really bad and then they're
mm.
kind of unrecoverable.
Yeah.
And when you dive into those roots, I think you can stop things from getting bad. You stop things from getting toxic. And some of those things would be like, hey, look, we're not going to get offices. So if that's really important to you, why don't you start looking for a new job and we'll start looking for a replacement, and let's see if we can, figure out a good outcome for this.
Yeah, I'd love to come back to that point in a minute, but I think it's really important, this idea, just to stress that oftentimes when we notice these things at the start, I think you alluded to it earlier, like this idea that the trust is kind of broken, like that person is underperforming and it's the blame is squarely placed on them. We don't have the conversation, we don't address the elephant in the room. Maybe we let things fester until it just
Yeah.
builds up and it just gets worse because we haven't actually addressed it. I think any thoughts around that and why that might happen?
Well, I told my son this recently because he had to make a bunch of difficult phone calls to tell people some news that was great for him, but tough for some of his friends. And I was like, "Look, bud, the difficult conversation never gets better by delaying
Mm,
it. In fact, it only gets worse because
yeah.
now people start to hear and you haven't told them. So I think we fear these difficult conversations, so we just assume that we not don't have them, it will go away.
You just sweep it under the
And
carpet.
I know someone who had one yesterday that was one of the, it should have had it 2 months ago, waited and waited. And what happens in our relationships when we don't do this, right? What happens is inevitably when we have the conversation, all the crap from the last 3 to 6 months comes up, right? Like it's,
Yes.
you know what? And you did this a month ago, and you did this 2 months ago, and you pissed me off 6 months ago. You're like, what? And so like it just it's always worse
Yeah.
because you didn't address it head on. I really believe there are far better outcomes if you just start saying it's okay to talk about that you're not happy or it's not working, or if it's okay for me to be like, this isn't working. You're If you have the right system, you should know that, hey, you're at 50% of quota for 3 quarters in a row. Like, obviously, that's not working. So, like, what are we going to do about it? Do you want to be in sales? Do you want to do this job? And the only way to have that honest conversation is not to feel like you're going to be walked out the door tomorrow, right?
Mm.
There are these statutory periods in other countries, and you might know you have that 3 months of protection, but in the US, there isn't, and so the fear level is higher, but it's still a cultural thing. It's
Yeah.
still, we just have to go back to, people aren't working there for life, right? They're joining your team for a season, and you should have a conversation at the end of the season and see if this all still makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that makes an awful lot of sense. And if I could share my perspective, this let's talk about 3 months now, is because that is, I think, that's become fairly standard when you get to more senior positions, especially in Europe. So from a recipient perspective, so if someone handed their notice in to me, and it was unexpected because I wasn't, having those conversations, I wasn't noticing what was going
Yeah,
on. We weren't having an open conversation about what their plans were, that they wanted to travel, etc., etc. So it came as a total surprise to me. Like, I, as the manager, I'm going to be really pissed off because I'm going to have to find someone else, and everyone
yeah,
else is on 3 months' notice
exactly. Yeah,
at that level. So I'm going to have a gap in my team. I'm going to have to pick up slack, or some of the other team are going to have to pick up slack, and it's going to lower the morale, basically. So it causes this issue, I think, just,
yeah.
from
It's
a manager's
a
perspective.
whole domino effect.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But then from an individual's perspective, we're so afraid of handing in our notice, having those open conversations and saying, this is not working out for me. I was brave enough in one of those organizations that I mentioned to have that conversation with my manager. And I said, not really loving the role that I'm in. I had switched roles,
yeah.
and we had a brief conversation about finding a different global role, and it could still be based in the same location, which sounded interesting, but he never really followed it up. And I continued just to not enjoy the role I was in till I got to a stage where I was like, I'm just done
I'm done.
here.
Yeah.
And probably came as a surprise to him. I brought my typed up letter, I handed it to him, and that was it. I was on my 3 months notice.
Yeah, and look, it's not really on the employee to do this. It's on the employee to do this, but it's on the employer to be very clear that there's a culture and environment where that is okay, right?
Yeah.
Why would an employee run into a buzzsaw where they know it's just going to hurt them, right? That has to be kind of set as the operating system. So people wrongly assume in this book, I'm encouraging everyone to just go run and tell everyone, they're like, no, don't do this in a company where there's no psychological safety or they'll fire you that day. Like,
Yeah.
that's not going
Yeah.
to work. Like, leaders have to believe that this is better for their business and set up the policy that way, and then ask employees to sort of come together with it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's such a nice approach, and it's very different to anything I've ever seen or heard people doing. One of my friends recently resigned from her role. Her teammates were understandably quite upset, and her boss's reaction was, okay, when's your last day? And that was kind of it, and there was no like, could we have done something better? How can we improve things? There was no sort of approach like that whatsoever.
Yeah. I think there's, like I said, there's so many opportunities for better outcomes if we will have these conversations.
Yeah. And how do you think we start? Like, say I'm a leader in an organization, and we're not really doing this stuff right now, whether it's we're regularly just using the 2 weeks notice, or we have the 3 months notice, whatever it might be. How do I start thinking about bringing this approach into the culture?
It's not a pitch for the book, but so many people ask me that the book, you can read half of it for free. I think it's like $3 otherwise. But people ask me for the playbook, so I wrote up the playbook and I shared it, which goes from first addressing the aspects of your culture, how to have the conversations, the communications, how to train people, what the components of a program look like. But it starts with the culture. It starts with you can't have any of this stuff without psychological safety, right? And the
Mm,
willingness to have these discussions and talk about these things. That is the underpinning of everything.
yeah. We talk about psychological safety quite a lot on the podcast. And like for me, it's the foundation of my framework, the Happier at Work framework. I'd love
Yeah,
to explore with you this concept. I'm thinking about it from a few different perspectives. So let's assume that we are a leader and we think we have psychological safety, but actually we don't. What
yeah.
are some of the steps that we can take to see whether we have a psychologically safe environment, and some steps to take to build that? Because I know it's not something that we
Yeah.
can just switch on and build overnight. What are some of the steps you see in building real psychological safety at work?
Yeah, I think there are cultures that have a lot of feedback and upward feedback, and people take it and they listen to it and notice in meetings whether people say things and what the reaction is or otherwise. If you want a great test though for this on your team and see psychology, tell your team to do something that's totally impossible based on a time, budget, or what. Like it's really absolutely impossible,
Yeah.
and see who says something like in the room, or see if they all go, "Yep, we got that, boss." And then what happens is they go out of the room, and you're like, "She's crazy," and like blah blah blah. Like the difference is in psychological safety, they'll tell it to your face and ask
Yeah.
questions. And
Yeah.
if you don't have it, they will all go reconvene in a room afterward and be like, "This guy's out of his mind,"
Yeah.
right? Like, and look, something you want people that'll overcome. But let's just say I went to my EA and I said, go find me a business class ticket to London from tomorrow for under $200. Like you want someone who's like, that's not happening and I'm not wasting my time on it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, like rather than okay, and then spending 12 hours trying to do something you can't do, and
Yeah.
then trying to justify. Like it's so funny. It's such a simple test, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and I've never heard someone share that before, but it is so true. And I think the difficulty is with this that as a leader, again, we're not deliberately sharing things that are really hard to do, but we don't know that actually they are really hard to do because we're not the ones who are doing it. But we'll ask people to do it. They'll say yes, they won't speak up. They'll
Yeah,
just convene themselves and try and figure out what's going on. So this
right.
is a test whether you have psychological safety. What are some of the things that you can do to build it?
Look, I think you normalize feedback. You have to, have these conversations. You need to collect stuff. You need to report back to people. Need to see that feedback is going to management and like it's okay and they're responding. So we would always collect a lot of feedback, and then at the same time we would kind of go back to people and say, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. We heard you. You're kind of reporting back and you're making open door. There's also like just watching meetings on whether you invite questioning, whether I mean I facilitated an offsite for a leadership team from a fabulous company, and they won 10 best places to work awards. And just when they did their actually I was speaking at their offsite, I didn't facilitate it, but they let me kind of be in the room. And they were doing their opening thing. They had a thing on, what's been good in my life, what's been bad in my life, what am I excited about today, and what's the elephant in the room. And just by the stuff that people said the elephant in the room was, I could tell you that this was an incredibly psychological safe team. And when they got to discussions later about roles and talking about, I don't want to be working for more than 5 more years, like they had no problem saying that stuff. And
Yeah.
I could tell because they were just willing to have these discussions, and people were willing to call out the CEO or say stuff or otherwise.
Yeah, I love that. And I think if you think about it, who doesn't want to work in an environment that is like that? And I think as individual leaders, it's up to us to challenge how things are done. I think, again, I've had several conversations about psychological safety. Some people say it has to come from the top. Other people say, as individual leaders, we can be the role models for psychological safety. Obviously, if it's not reciprocated, it becomes a bit of an uphill battle. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's got to be reciprocated. Yeah, like again, people need to see this. They will notice in a meeting where they ask a question and the leader says, "Thanks for asking that," and answers it honestly, or they shut them down and kind of say, "You shouldn't have embarrassed me and you have no right to ask that." I used to pay people in our town halls with Starbucks gift cards to ask like the most difficult, uncomfortable question. And someone's like, "Are you going to sell the company and like leave us all hanging?" Otherwise, I'm like, "Awesome," because I'm sure everyone's thinking that. So
Yeah.
you said it. So here's $20 to Starbucks.
Nice. I love that. Um, if we, as an as from an individual perspective, we're not feeling the best, we're not feeling that reciprocated psychological safety. When do you think is the time to leave? So you mentioned earlier that we can tell within a couple of weeks if maybe someone is not right in the role.
Yeah.
From the individual's perspective, how quickly do you think you can tell it's not the right place for me? And how do we know it's time to leave?
I think you leave when, well, hey, you leave if, and obviously there's conditions that to everyone say you leave when, um, first of all, you leave if you feel like it doesn't align with your values, right?
Mm,
Those are unreconcilable. And I think you leave if you don't believe in the mission or the vision, or you don't like the work you're doing. You're not engaged in it because I think then it's just like a clock. Like, am I going to tell them or are they going to tell me, right? So like, yeah, like every sometimes we've seen the people that you've had to let go who are doing a horrible job. There's almost a sense of relief when you tell them, right? They knew they were doing a horrible job. They didn't want to do a horrible job. They're in the wrong job, and like they needed someone to put them out of their misery, right? So, I would say if look, I can't tell these stories because they're personal, but I
mm.
can tell you some people that stayed in jobs that I know where the money was good, but the values were misaligned, and they resulted in disastrous outcomes for them.
You can't
I
share the
can't
story.
share the details,
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I know a few of them. So
Yes,
I'll
yeah,
figure
yeah.
out how to anonymize it one day, but
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah,
to do that. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
I would love to know, and I'm kind of giving myself away slightly here. I'm a big fan of the show Below Deck. I don't know if you've ever watched
I've
it.
seen it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm supposed to admit to that, but I've seen it. My kids love it.
yeah.
I'll
Well,
go with
this
that
is
as
it.
an excuse. Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm supposed to admit to that either,
yeah.
but I do quite enjoy it. There's a lot of drama. But in one of the recent episodes that I saw, one of the employees and her dealing with the leader, she just had no idea that she was underperforming. She really had no idea. The leader was getting increasingly pissed off with her.
Yeah, that's
And
such a
every time she communicated with her, she's like, oh, I'm going to improve, I'm going to improve. And eventually she was fired. But I'd love to explore that in a little bit of detail where like someone just has no idea that they're underperforming. And so it comes as this massive surprise.
yeah, that's a failure in either leadership. I do think there should be check-ins. I think check-ins because people forget stuff. They should be a regurgitation of what you've heard along the way. So it's either failure of managers to let people know where they stand, which is bad leadership, and I think leaders should be managed on how well they lead, not how well they do. But it's also a failure of the data or the KPI or the systems that would let you know that you're not doing a good job, right? It's a famous story on my podcast. Alan Mulally talks about when he came into Ford as the CEO of Ford, and they were losing like $14 billion a year. And he came into the meeting, and everyone's lights on their green light, red light thing were all green. And this was a psychological safety problem. He's like,
Yeah.
guys, unless we're trying to lose the most money in history, like what the hell is going on here? Like I want the actual numbers and results. And so a lot of it is solved with data and dashboards and accountability. There should be some objective measures of are you doing a good job or not?
Yeah. So that we can reflect back to, and this should be shared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to the
By the way, it makes it a lot easier to manage. Again,
yeah.
we expect our sales performers to be at least 80% of quota every quarter, and being below that is a problem, and that
Mm.
triggers a satisfactory performance. So if I'm at 50% of quota for 2 months or 3 months in a row, I'm always surprised. There was another Friday Forward I did called Surprised at Surprised. I'm surprised when salespeople who understand the objectivity of the role and who are way missing their numbers and then come into a discussion where they're losing their job are surprised by that, right? It just if you know your job and you understand that shouldn't be a surprise. You're lying to yourself, somehow in that context.
Yeah, that and for whatever reason that going back to what you said earlier, Robert, that either it's not a good fit for you in terms of
Right.
the role, or something else is going on that you haven't actually brought to the surface to say, and this is, how can we work together to actually fix what's going on here? And I
Yeah, you
think, I
might be
mean,
thinking, oh, they really like me. And it's like, they really like you, but your job is selling and you're not selling, right?
yeah,
So you, I'm particularly surprised in those situations, like where like you've got to be aware of that. Like that
yeah.
is just, that shouldn't be a surprise.
It's separating the person from the performance, really,
Yeah.
isn't it? So the person, nice, and, we can go out and have a beer after work or whatever it might be. We get along as a people, but actually, when it comes to the performance, it's having those conversations, which are sometimes difficult, and
Yeah.
bringing that to the surface as well. Something else that I talk about, and it might be related to why people leave organizations. So, if we're not having conversations about our careers and what those next steps look like, what are some of the reasons that you see that people do opt to leave, and if they're not getting that kind of support from their leaders?
Yeah, well, I want to make sure I go back to something you said before because it's important. But I think you leave when you stop learning and your growth curve plateaus, right?
Mm,
Other than comp issues or otherwise, like, but people want to grow, they want to learn, they want meaningful work. And when that plateaus, when they reach the top of a mastery curve, it's sort of most dangerous. But I do want to go back. There is a psychological phenomenon that is a derivative cognitive dissonance that I have not trademarked yet. But I think that goes on and it happens. So I have Sarah on my team and I really like Sarah and Sarah's great. We'll go back to sales because it's so easy. But Sarah sucks at sales. She's not
mm.
selling well. She's not good at it. Really like Sarah. So what happens most things? The cognitive dissonance, the mind can't handle these two things that like
Ah,
I'm
yeah.
going to have to lay off Sarah, but I really like Sarah.
Mm,
So it has to fix that. So how does it fix that? It starts not liking Sarah. And it's like, oh, Sarah's late, Sarah's lazy, Sarah's this, Sarah's that. Like, and it brings that
yeah.
all into coherence so that when I finally get rid of Sarah, I'm annoyed at Sarah and I'm mad, time for you to go. Otherwise.
And it
I,
makes me feel better about
it makes
myself.
you feel better
Mm,
about yourself because you've
mm,
removed the dissonance. You've put it
yeah.
all on this side, which Sarah deserved this. She had it coming. She's lazy. She's this, whatever. She's stupid. Like all the things you come up with to feel better. So you are doing what needed to be done. There's a different option, which is to lean into the relationship and
Mm,
say, Sarah, I love you. You're awesome. You're great. Sales is not for you. This is
yeah.
not working. We can't let this go on. How can I help you? Do you want
Mm,
to talk to different departments? Do you want time to start looking for a new job? Obviously, like this can't go on. So there's a way to lean into that relationship, and rather and bring the coherence this way rather than that way. I think 99% of people go that way.
yeah, I would definitely agree. And that makes sense what you're saying, that we want to be the heroes. We want to
We
like
don't want to be the bad
ourselves.
guy.
We don't want to be the
Right.
bad guy. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not the bad guy if I fire someone who actually really annoys me or who I don't like anymore,
Who's
even
a
though
bad
they
person.
started as a
Yeah.
nice person. Let's face it. We've
Yeah.
covered lots of different aspects from the book, Robert. Is there anything else that you want to share before we talk about the new one?
No, and again, if you go on my Substack, if you go to Friday Forward Substack, there's a little tab, and you can get half the book and read most of it for free if you want to check out the playbook there.
Brilliant. Love it. And so talk to us about the new book. Do you have a working title?
Yeah, I have a prototype. Comes out in October. It's called The Compass Within.
Wow.
So this double clicks. A lot of my books and work have talked about this concept of personal core values and the importance
Mm,
of it. And a lot of people are like, that's great. I'm all in on it. Like, how do I figure out mine? And I was like, well, it's complicated. I have a course that I did. I have a program that I did with leaders. It's not like a let me give you the answer. Like
yeah.
there's real work to do. So I turned that process into a parable, into a story of someone going through a core value sort of crises in their life, what I would call the big three, which is your vocation or your company, your community, and your partner. And they meet a mentor, and that mentor helps them figure out their core values and walks them through a process to do that. And so
Mm,
you get to kind of watch it. And then at the end, like a parable, Lencioni book says, here's what you saw, and here's how you can do this work yourself.
yeah. I love parable based books. And I think, if I share my own experience of core values, my experience is I knew that my company had them because they were pasted on the wall and they were in our email signatures that were on our website, but I never knew that I, as an individual, also had core values until I started coaching and learning about this stuff in my master's. Like, that's when it all became apparent to me and all kind of fell into place. Like, okay, that's what's been going on, that there's been a
Yeah.
misalignment between my values and the behaviors that I'm witnessing in the workplaces that I work in. Do you have any kind of similar stories of your own and how you figured out what your own core values were?
Yeah, and I won't give it all away because the story's in this book. You can go to compass-within.com if you're interested, and order it today. But yeah, I went to a leadership program that became really clear to me that core values were super important, but it didn't tell you how to find them.
Yeah.
And so I spent like 3 or 6 months going through that process. Then I built a process to start training our team members on it, and that's basically the process that that is sort of incorporated into this book.
Yeah. I love it. And I love that it's come from that place that, yeah, they said how important it was, but they never actually showed you how to do it. And I think that that was crucial. Like for me, when I first started doing this, I think I picked out words, or I thought of things that were important to me, and I had something like 35. And I was like, oh, I'm so great because I have
It's
35 core
got to be
values. It's like,
three or
no,
four,
no,
but
no.
yeah. I'd be curious if you go through. A big thing I focus on is actionable and wording them in a way that you know that if you did it or you didn't do it, and there's a specific process and a thing called the validator on core values that are validated or not validated, because you got to know whether you did it, and you got to be able to say I did a good job at this or I did it. It's a decision making rubric. So I'd be interested for you to check it out and see if it helps you sort of polish those up a little bit.
I definitely would love. Now, I have moved on from the 35. I did narrow it down to five, and I kind of grouped some things together and things that were sort of interrelated. But I love the idea of having a rubric because it's like for me, it's important because your values are how you make decisions. And, I
The
see
most
these
important thing, yeah.
words sometimes and I'm like, but is that like how can that be a core value? I don't really understand how that is a core value. So I love that idea. I'll definitely be checking that out, how to do that. Robert, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
I think it just means being engaged. It means showing up, being engaged. You're not watching the clock. You're enjoying your work. We all know what that flow looks like. And to our the last point we were just talking about, I think that happens when you're aligned with your values and doing things that are aligned with your values. It's just pretty natural.
Totally, totally. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect, if they want to get their hands on your
Sure.
2 weeks notice book and your Compass book,
Yeah,
what's the
you
way
can
they
go
can do
to
that?
robertglazer.com and you can see everything there. Compass Within. Also, anyone who pre-orders the book before October, I'm giving anyone the course too, which is normally $100. The course that goes with the book that'll walk you through the entire process if you kind of need help with it. So my BHAG is to help 1 million people figure out their core values over the next 5 years, and
Wow.
so I'm excited to spend some time on that.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. And such a noble cause as well, especially when it comes to happiness at work, I think. So really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for such an important discussion.
Thank you for having me.